All right, welcome everybody. Okay, so tonight we're learning for Shematu Yecheskel ben Tzila, and Lilu Nishmat, the Fal Fuad ben Rina Rita. Yes. Neshama Shavan Aliyah. I came out wrong if I said yes like that. Okay. Anyways, so so everyone's welcome to join us every Thursday at BJX at 1601 Quentin Road at 8 p.m. Next week, Chanukah, I don't believe we're going to have a class, so just stay tuned to the WhatsApp group or however you get this information from. Okay, so now let us begin with Chanukah. Chanukah is, you know what, even before we even begin to I like to usually put it in like the chronological order to see where Chanukah actually fell into place throughout the history of Jewish history. And the way it worked was like this. It started off with the first Bet HaMikdash. After the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed by Babylonia, that went into the first exile. And then after Babylonia was in power and they destroyed the Jewish temple, the Bet HaMikdash, and the Jewish nation, then they were taken over by Parasumatai, so the Persian Empire. And during the Persian Empire, that was the story of Haman, this is the story of Purim, and during that era is where the second Bet HaMikdash was built. Does anybody know who was it built by? Dayavish, right, which was whose son? Esther, very good. Esther and Achashverosh had a son. From that son helped build the second Bet HaMikdash. That was the end of the Purim story. Then, followed by Persia being the ruling empire, they were taken over by Greece. Going back, you want to go to Alexander the Great. We're not going to go that far, back into it. But eventually, they were taken over by Greece, and then we had Antiochus, which is where the Chanukah story happened. The Chanukah story happened while the Bet HaMikdash was still existing. The Bet HaMikdash actually was standing for about another close to 200 years after the Chanukah story. And then the Greece, the strong power, the exiles that the Jewish people went from Greece to Rome, and that is the exile that we are in today. So when the Greek culture, the Greek ideology was something very fascinating because they were very intellectual. You had a lot of philosophers that came out of this. You have Aristotle, you have Socrates, you have Plato, you have a lot of the famous Greek, scholars. And besides even the philosophy, you had also, they were very advanced in math and science, in all aspects of let's say the new modern world in that time. So when they went, what sort of instigated the Jewish, let's call it hatred, the Jewish, destruction, their goal to destroy Judaism was really stemmed from the fact of going back 150 years before the Chanukah story. Before the Chanukah story, there was something known as the Septuagint. Septuagint was where the Greeks wanted to go and translate. The king of the Greek nation wanted to go and translate the Torah. So he took a bunch of rabbis, put them all in separate rooms, and asked them all to each translate the Torah. Why did he put them in separate rooms? Because he didn't want them to go into cahoots and go and change things, and then, just to make it, user-friendly for the Greek culture. So they were put into separate rooms, and they each made actually a bunch of changes, but miraculously through Ruach HaKodesh, God made it that each one made the same exact changes. So they came out with the same Torah, and it was in Greek. And now the Greek ideology was very much in a sense of you do for yourself. Whatever makes you happy, that's what you should do. Whatever it is that you want, that's what you should do. Everything else doesn't matter. Only you matter. Now, for a long period of time, they saw the Jews as, call for a better word, a bunch of weirdos. What are they doing? Why do they have to wear fake hair? Why do they go and they have to wear, well, everyone was wearing long skirts then. But better yet, everyone's wearing tablecloths tied with belts. But when you think, you see a Jew that goes and they're wrapping strings, around on their arm. They're putting a little box on their head. And be like, what's with this weirdo? What are they doing? It's so odd. And they looked at them as it's very ridiculous. I don't want to throw the Amish people out there, but I will, because they don't have technology. I know, I'm just kidding. You look at the Amish town, you see them and you think it's very odd. Why do they do that? Why do they have horse and buggies when there's cars? Why do they have to put candles by the windows when there's electricity? But they have the reasons, and they have the reasons why they want to do it. But anybody from the outside who doesn't understand their perspective, their origination, their understanding, looks at it as very, very odd. But what happens all of a sudden when the Greek culture all of a sudden started learning the Torah. Now, instead of going, the Greek was very into philosophy, very into intellectualism. And all of a sudden, when they saw like the Jewish nation as a bunch of weirdos, all of a sudden they started reading the Torah and they were like, wait a minute, like, they're actually very smart. They're very philosophical. There's a lot of knowledge in the Torah. And all of a sudden, what it used to be like, you do you, it's not a problem, all of a sudden it was like, wait a minute, you're a threat to what we stand for. We stand for, we have to do whatever we want to enjoy ourselves in this life. And the Judaism stand for is like, no, it's not all about you in this world. It's also about your friends, your neighbors, your family, and other people. So all of a sudden, the Greek culture and the Jewish culture started to clash. And they clashed because the Greek, all of a sudden, were like, wait a minute, you're going against what we believe in, against what we preach, against what we understand. So about 150 years after the Septuagint, that's when the story of Chanukah happened. There's a lot of things brewing. Eventually, Antiochus was in power. And Antiochus went and he wanted to have a one nation rule. Like in order to be united, communism, Russia tried to do this. In order to be united, take out all religion. Everybody believes in the same thing. Everybody understands in the same thing. And then everybody will go and will be united and will be a stronger nation, in itself. So Antiochus went and he started instituting anti-Jewish decrees. So he did everything from you're not allowed to learn Torah, you're not allowed to go, you're not allowed to keep Shabbat, you're not allowed to keep kosher, you're not allowed to go, you're not allowed to have a brit milah. And what was the scary thing is that the Jewish nation actually took hold of that. It was known as Hellenism. The people that became Hellenists, they were attached to the Greek culture. They started going with the Greek idolatry. They started going with the Greek ideology. They started going with having the gymnasiums, having the Greek avodah zarah, eating like them, looking like them, speaking like them. But in order for Antiochus to go and institute his decree nationwide, to the entire Jewish nation, he had to make some examples. And anybody here a teacher? So I don't know if this works or if this not. I remember once that I had a teacher that explained to us, like when he comes in right away in the first day of class, he's got to show who's boss. So somebody is going to get in trouble. Like somebody is going to be sent to the principal. Because when you started off, you got to show who's boss. You got to set an example. Antiochus wanted to set an example. So what did he do? He went and he tried to find anybody that didn't go directly according to his plan, and then he went and he punished them. So there are three famous examples that are noted in our tradition. And the first one was regarding Brit Milah. So you're not allowed to have a Brit Milah. There were two women that gave a Brit Milah, they gave circumcision to their children. And in order to go and show how serious he was, what he did was he took these women and he paraded them through town. And when he paraded them, he had their babies hung by the mothers' necks. And they were hung by the mother's necks, and they were paraded through town. And eventually, when they finished, the parade, they were thrown off the roof of the gates of the city. So they were thrown off to their death, just to try to show who is a boss, and you better listen to his rules. Now, the second, what?
Why the mothers and not the fathers?
I don't know. People are scared, maybe more with them. The fathers would be the one who are required to do the Brit Milah, but I don't know why he picked the mothers. But he picked the mothers. He picked it hurts home more when a mother gets, if you hear of a husband getting abused by his wife, you'd be like, oh, just come on, just be a man, but a woman gets abused, be like, stop the world, something is happening. There are many men that, and again, I'm not speaking for the men that get abused by their wives, but there are many men that get abused, by their wives, but it doesn't look as like, okay, whatever, it's fine. But when a woman gets hurt, it hits home more. So maybe he wanted to hit it home more and destroy the mothers as opposed to the fathers. But everybody, yeah, unfortunately, everybody died. The second case that's famous is one of the things that the Greeks made is that everybody had to go and serve avodah zarah. They had to serve idolatry. There was one particular, tzaddik. He was 90 years old. It was known as Elazar Cohen, and he was actually very close to Antiochus' second man. So Antiochus was the one who was ruling the Greek Empire, but he went and he appointed Philippus to go and overrule, Judea and the Israel region. And actually, Philippus is known as Philip in the modern day. He was known as Philip even back then, but I'm saying like that was his name, Philip. So whoever's name is Philip, just know who you're associating with. Okay, anyways, so he went, and Elazar Cohen and Philip were very close. They had a history beforehand. And Philippos liked Elazar Cohen. He respected it. And he said, listen, he says, what they made Elazar Cohen do is either one of two things. Either eat food that was served for Avodah Zarah, which is usually pork, or actually serve Avodah Zarah in front of the entire Jewish nation. And Elazar Cohen says, I'm not doing it. And Philippos was like, listen, we're going to have to kill you if you don't do it. Just do it. And he says, no, I'm not going to do it. So Philippos says, you know what, fine. I'll make you a deal. You prepare your own food. I know usually the food that we sacrifice to the idolatry is usually pork, it's usually pig. You prepare your own food, 100% kosher. Bet Yosef, like the most strictest, koshering, you do it. And then you just eat it. That's all you need to do. So Elazar Cohen says, but wait a minute. He says, but people are going to go, and they're going to see me. They're a 90-year-old Kohen who was righteous his entire life. All of a sudden gives everything up, because they don't know that it was kosher. They'll think that it's not kosher. No, he had to. The rule was from Philippos is that no one can know that it's kosher. People have to know think that it was not kosher. So Elazar Cohen says, I'm not doing it. He says, even if it's kosher, why? Because people are going to see it, and people are going to go and run away from Judaism because of that. And I'm not interested. I'm not doing it. And as much as he begged, Elazar, as much as Philip tried to beg him, Elazar Cohen refused it. And eventually, he was murdered in the most brutal fashion possible. Just to try to gain the weakness of the Jewish nation to submitting their rule over them. And finally, that was the second case. The third and final case was Chanah and her 7 sons. So the story of Chanah of her 7 sons is actually very famous, probably the most famous out of all those 3. And I want to try to go and delve into some important lessons that we learn from this. Now, Chanah, what happened was like this: is that Antiochus went and he appointed Philip over the entire area. And now he was going back to Syria, to his capital. And when he went, he heard that as he was traveling out of the country, he heard that Philip, his commanding general who was ruling over that area, is going, and he went and he captured a righteous woman and 7 righteous boys, and he's going to put them to trial. Now Antiochus was like, this one, I want to be involved in this. I want to go in there. I want to make sure that I'm overseeing it. I want to be the judge over it. He felt like he needed to be there. So he turned around and he came back to back to Israel. And when he gets there, they lined him up, the mother and her 7 sons. Now the Antiochus went in age order. He brings the oldest son and he says, I want you to bow down to my idol. And the oldest son said, no, it's not going to happen. And he went, and Antiochus tried to convince him with a long speech saying how important it is, but yada yada, how he wants to go, and it's going to be to his benefit. And the son goes and he says, why do you bother with your trying to speech? He says, we welcome death for the sake of our holy Torah. He was so strong in his religion that he would refuse to even think about even like reneging it even a little bit. And as much as Antiochus tried to go and convince him, you have to understand, this trial was not just in private. It was in front of everybody, so it was embarrassing for him. So he went and he tried to convince him. He would do nothing. He would budge absolutely nowhere. And Antiochus went, and in the most nicest way that I could say this possible, he severed him limb by limb. And then he peeled off his skin of his face, and he boiled his body parts in front of his mother and his other 6 brothers to try to weaken their spirit. And this is the first. I'm not going to go to the remainder. This was the first of the 7 children. What?
In front of all the people?
In front of everybody. Yeah. In front of everybody. So he also took out his tongue also, because he didn't like the way that he cut off his tongue as well.
He was alive?
He was alive, yeah, during this time. And after this tzaddik boy, this righteous boy died, the Antiochus went and he called the second son, the second to the oldest, and he says, so what happened? Bow down to my idol. And the second one's like, I ain't gonna do it. He says, what you did to him, you can do to me. I ain't gonna, he would not budge. And he killed the second one also, just in the same brutal way. And then he went to the third one. And the third one met his same thing, the fourth as well. The 5th brother goes over and spoke up, and he says, don't think that God gave us over to you because God hated us. God actually loves us, and he granted us this honor to die al Kiddush Hashem. And don't think that you're going to be let off, because God will go and serve vengeance upon you and your children after you. Right? Not something you want to hear by somebody you're about to murder. And that didn't change Antiochus one bit, and he murdered him exactly the same way as the remaining, as the past brothers. The sixth brother met the same fate. Finally came the seventh and youngest child. There are quite a few opinions on the age of this child, but the most common one is that he was 7 years old. He was 7 years old, and the king, Antiochus, the ruler over there, goes over to him, and he tries to convince him. He says, listen, if you bow down, I'm going to make you wealthy, because it's looking really bad for him. Like, no one's listening to him. Everybody's dying. He says, I'm going to make you wealthy. I'm going to give you gold. I'm going to give you silver. I'm going to give you jewels. You're going to have power. You're going to have everything that you want in your life. So the child, the 7-year-old, refused just like all his brothers. He had the strength of just like all his brothers. And at this point, Antiochus goes over to Chanah and says, listen, woman, speak to your child. You had 7 children. You have only 1 left. Go and speak some sense to him, so at least you have 1 child remaining after this ordeal. And she says, okay, let me try. She goes over to, Chanah goes over to the child. She kisses him and she says, listen, instead of convincing him to go and follow Antiochus, she says, listen, I carried you in my body for 9 months. I nursed you for 2 years. I fed you until today. And I taught you that you have to fear God. And everything that you see, everything that God created is all from God. The reason why you are alive today is because God made you alive. And if you would go and God would decide that you would die today, you would die today. It's all in God's hands. You have to go and fulfill whatever it is that you needed to be fulfilled and follow the path of the Torah. Instead of convincing him, she gave him like a pep talk to go and continue. Because one of the things that a person has to die for is if somebody forces a person, even by gunpoint, even by the punishment of death, to go and serve Avodah Zarah, you have to give up your life rather than to serve up Avodah Zarah. So after she gave him the pep talk, she goes over to Antiochus and says, listen, I tried. I couldn't prevail over him. I couldn't do anything. And this little 7-year-old boy goes up to Antiochus and he says, and this is what he tells him before he knows what's going to be happening. Listen to the power that he had. He goes, I laugh at your foolishness, at your narishkeit, at your nonsense. He says, I believe in God, I believe in the Torah, who you go and go against. And he goes over and he says, you will remain abomination upon all mankind, and you're going to be very loathsome and far away from God. And the king was so angry, but he says, you know what, let me try one more thing. He calls over the kid and he says, listen, you don't want to serve God, you don't want to serve my idols because you love God, fine. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to take my ring. I'm going to put it down on the floor. All you got to do is pick up the ring and give it to me scot-free. You get everything that you want. He was like, negotiating with a terrorist, like the reverse way. He was negotiating and be like, let's get something out of you. And the boy says, no, I'm not going to do that. Why did he say no? So there's 2 reasons why. Number 1 is that he wanted him to pick up the ring that he would drop. It would be in front of the Avodah Zarah. So when he would bend down to pick up the ring, it would look as if he's going and he's worshiping Avodah Zarah. There's another opinion that the ring itself had an actual Avodah Zarah on it. So when he would go and pick it up, that is itself, part of the Avodah Zarah. So the 7-year-old boy says absolutely not, and he refused. So at this point in time, the king, told him, that's it, the game is over. But Chanah begged, the mother begged, please, let me just have, one more talk with my son. And she goes over to her son, and the son was next to the other 6 brothers, the bodies of the other 6 brothers. And it was, Chanah said basically a speech, as if she was speaking to all her children. She goes and she says, my children, go to your ancestor Avraham Avinu, and go and tell him like this. Tell him that, Avraham, you sacrificed 1 son, I sacrificed 7 sons. And with that, she gave a kiss to her youngest child, and he went on his, his own path. And unfortunately, Antiochus went and he tortured this 7-year-old boy much worse than all the other previous brothers. At the end, Chanah was sitting in front of, she was herself with the bodies of her 7 children. And the final ending of the story is that she prayed for 3 things. She prayed, number 1, for the soul of her children. She prayed for the strength of the Jewish people. And then finally, she prayed that God take her soul because she doesn't want to be taken by Antiochus and the Greek nation. And after she finished her prayers, her soul left her body. She fell dead upon her 7 children, her 7 boys. Now, Rabbi Yosef Shlomo Kahaneman, the Panovich Rav, goes and says, what was Chanah doing? Well, she goes over to all her children and she says, when you go up to heaven, go tell Avraham Avinu, you sacrificed 1. I got 7. What was this, a brag? It's like you did 1, I did 7, like as if she's better than Avraham? Is that what's going on? Says the Panovich Rav, absolutely not. Absolutely not. She wasn't going and saying that I am better than you, Avraham. But rather, what was she saying? She's saying, Avraham Avinu, you sacrificed 1 son so many years ago, so long ago. She says, you know where I had the power to go and be able to sacrifice 7 children for the sake of the honor of God? Because of you. Because Avraham Avinu had the power to go and sacrifice one son, that power went to his descendants. And his descendants was Chanah. And Chanah was able to go and sacrifice her 7 boys because Avraham Avinu was able to sacrifice one. There is something known as spiritual DNA. Just like you have physical DNA, there's something called spiritual DNA. During this time, where every year when Chanukah falls out, it always falls out during the time of Yosef HaTzadik and his story. Now, there's an amazing, I love the story of Yosef. There's so much to learn. And if you think about it, the Torah puts a very large portion on the story of Yosef. As from the dreams to him going to prison, there's so much about Yosef. You look at Yitzchak, there's almost nothing about Yitzchak. Even Yaakov, you have a lot, but like Yosef, for some reason, you have so much. There's so much to learn from Yosef. Now, let's look at Yosef HaTzadik. Actually, before that, let's try to understand something. Before we get to Yosef, let's try to understand something that's known as the spiritual zechut avot. That the way that this will make you understand the story of Yosef so much more. When somebody goes and does a good deed, it doesn't only affect you; it affects your children as well. Now, when you, let's say, have a righteous ancestor, that power of that ancestor, whether it be a grandfather, a father, or it could be many, many generations back, they give you a special power. This is known as the spiritual DNA power. Now, this power, it can either be protect you from harm, it could give you divine aid. Let's say you need to do something and you don't have the power to do it by yourself. There could be a spiritual, like sometimes you feel like you just can't do it, you want to give up. And you're like depressed, you're sad, you're down and whatnot, and all of a sudden you have this like surge of power. And you come back and you're like, before you were down, you were sleeping all day, you couldn't do it. All of a sudden you have this like urge to be able to like fight and conquer and win. And many times where that stems from is that's not from you. That's from your ancestor. It gave you a special power because of the deeds and the Torah that they did. There could also be other beneficial opportunities that that come into it. In order to understand this, think of it this way. You have some people that are tall. Usually, and it's usually that how are you tall? Because you have genetics. You didn't do anything to be tall, right? You didn't work on yourself to be tall. You didn't think when you're younger, be tall, be tall. You were just given that thing. So too, you have spiritual benefits. Like let's say you have a parent that worked on their anger, that worked on their midot, that worked on their tzniut. That goes and affects the children. It passes on to the children, just like you have physical DNA, you have blue eyes. It doesn't come because, just for nothing. It comes from DNA. There's some sort of genetic, predisposition that you would have blue eyes or you would be tall. You always have a fluke. I had a friend of mine, 6'5". His parents were very short. I don't know, you always have that, like sometimes you have, like this fluke and it always happens. But generally speaking, you have DNA, which means is the genetics that your parents are passed on to your, to your descendants, to your children. The same thing with spirituality. But the important thing is that we each have this spiritual, predisposition to like genetic superiority in overcoming so many things. But we have to capitalize on that. Now let me explain to you how to understand this based off the Maharsha. The Maharsha goes and brings down and asks a question. It says, I don't understand something. In one point, in the Gemara Bava Metzia, page 86b, it goes and says that because Avraham Avinu had 3 special guests, and because of that, he went and he served milk and butter. Because of that, the Jewish nation were able to get the man. And then he went and he served over them. He was like over them and he served them. Because of that, the Jewish nation got the clouds of glory, the Ananei HaKavod. And then he gave them water to wash their feet, and because of that, they got the well of Miriam. That's the Gemara in Bava Metzia. Then there's the Gemara in Tanit, page 9a, that goes and says the man, the clouds of glory, and the well is based off what? Is Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, respectively. That's what Moshe is for the man, Aaron is for the clouds of glory, and Miriam is for the well of Miriam. So the question is, like, wait a minute, is it in merit of Moshe Rabbeinu and Miriam and Aaron, or is it in merit of Avraham Avinu? So the answer is, the Maharsha says that originally it started with Avraham. Avraham went and he worked on himself, and even though it was difficult for him, he went and he served these angels. He went and he served these 3 special guests. And because of that, the power that he went continue on to the future descendants. And who was his future descendants? You had Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. And they capitalized, very important, they capitalized on that power. They were able to go and capitalize, and they built on that. So really, the reason why the Jewish nation, the reason why we had the well of Miriam, the Ananei HaKavod, and the man is really a melt of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. But where did they get the power to do that? They got the power from the ancestor of Avraham. So this power goes from one descendant to another, and you can either do one or two things. You could either be like, well, my rabbi was a really big, my grandfather was a really big rabbi. A little bit too ahead of myself. Got to slow down. My grandfather was a huge rabbi. I'm like, so what are you going to do with it? My great ancestor was a big tzaddik. And what are you? You don't keep Shabbat. Like, what are you going to do with yourself? Like, why don't you go? So you have to be smart. You have to capitalize on these. You have the power to do it. The question is, are you going to capitalize it, or are you going to let it, you're going to sleep and let it, float by? With this understanding, let's try to uncover the beautiful story of Yosef HaTzadik. So Yosef goes at a very young age of 17. He gets sold by his brothers. And it wasn't like, I'll sell you for a day. He got sold for good. Imagine a teenager getting sold by his own siblings. He'll be like, that's it. He's done. There's nothing to talk about anymore. And it wasn't like smooth sailing. It wasn't like he was, had an easy life. He went and he served, a master. And this was even difficult, just serving the master. He went and the master's wife kept on tempting him to go and try to do a sin with her. And he somehow overcame all that. And then what happened? Instead of getting rewarded, he went and he was put in prison for 12 years. Now 12 years, by the way, it's not like nowadays you get sentenced to 12 years and you're like, okay, you're going to sit there. Yosef HaTzadik, when he was in prison, it wasn't like he didn't have a sentence. Paul just sent him to prison. They just send him there. And it wasn't like, generally it's for life. There's no like coming out of prison. So Yosef was sitting in prison for 12 years, 12 long years. And by the way, it's not like these prisons nowadays where you have heat, you have, showers, you have food, you have TV, you have yard, you can work out. Yeah, I think you can even get a college degree now in prison. So like, it wasn't like that back then. You are in a dungeon. What a dungeon means is that they dug a very, very deep pit and they covered it with some sort of like, wires or like whatever, like bars. And then you lived there with the rain, with the snow, with everything, for 12 years or until you died. This is where he lived. And after 12 years, miraculous change of events, he went and he was put second in command. He was put second to Paro. Now, a few years go by, and his brothers come and meet him, and they bow down to him, and they go, just like his dreams. I'm not going to go through the whole story, it's a long story, but just everything happened just the way that he said that it would happen. Now, when he would go, and he would, confront his brothers. The brothers made fun of him. We will never bow down to you. You'll never be anything. They talked down to him. What would a normal person do at that time? Hate them. Both. Yeah, I'd be like, well, look who's here now. And be like, yeah, you bow down. No, bow down again. And be like, bow down again. And like, let's take this around. And be like, remember when? How people love saying, what was the saying? What do people love saying? I was right, but like... I told you so. I told you so, yeah. And be like, aha! Hey, you see? I was right! You were wrong! I told you so! In your face! Right? And a bunch of other Egyptian new slang that he could have spoke about. But he didn't! You know what happened? When his brothers came in, and he was about to reveal himself to his brothers, you know what Yosef HaTzadik said? Yosef goes and he tells the Egyptian officers, leave. Go out. Why did they say to leave? Says Rashi, he didn't want to embarrass his brothers. What? He just spent 12 years in prison. The last thing that he should worry about is embarrass his brothers. But no. He says, no. I want you to go out because I don't want to embarrass my brothers. And when Yosef HaTzadik went and he revealed himself, he didn't go in your face. He didn't say, I told you so. He says, no. He was comforting them. He was like, don't worry. Don't be sad. It was like, cool. Don't worry about it. Everything worked out. You thought of me for bad. God thought of me for good. I'm like, are you kidding me? He should have said, look who's laughing right now. Be like, I said I was dreaming about this day for 12 years. When you're going to come, how people, when they dream, when they could tell their boss, I'm done, in your face. They dream about it. He could have been, I was dreaming about this in my prison cell for 12 years. What would you tell your brothers when you meet them? But he didn't. He was worried about them. He comforted them. Where did he get his power from? Where did he have this ability? You have, unfortunately, you have families that argue with each other over money, over inheritance, over, different things. You have families that don't speak to each other because of $50,000. Brothers and sisters are estranged because of some money. You have over here 12, 12 years in prison is? 12 years in American prison. Think about that. Now think about what it would be in ancient prison. You think it'd be all right, fine. all right, I'll give you wheat, but why don't you spend, 12 years in prison and then let's talk. An eye for an eye. He could have done that, but where, if you think about it, how did he get this power from? Where did he have this ability? But it goes even further. Yaakov Avinu never knew that Yosef was sold by his brothers. You know that? Crazy chidush. Yaakov Avinu, his own father, like the favorite son, Yosef, he never knew that Yosef was sold by his brothers. How do we know this? The pasuk says in Bereshit, in chapter 50, it goes and says that after Yaakov Avinu died, the brothers go over to Yosef and it says, listen, your father commanded us, before he died, that you should forgive your brothers for the evil that they did for you. That's what the brothers told Yosef after their father died. Now, the Gemara tells us that the Yaakov Avinu never actually said this. Yaakov Avinu never told the brothers, to go and tell Yosef this message. Rather, the brothers go and altered the facts. They changed the truth. Why? For the sake of peace. They realized there could be a lot of problems. For the sake of peace, they went and they changed the truth. Says the Ramban, Nachmanides, he learns from this that Yaakov Avinu never knew in his entire life that his brothers, his own children, sold Yosef, the other child. And this also explains why in Bereshit, in the 48th chapter, it says that the brothers had to go to tell Yosef that his father is sick. Why did the brothers have to tell Yosef HaTzadik that his father is sick? Didn't he know that his father was sick? And the answer was no. He would not go visit his father alone. He would only visit. Why? Because he didn't want his father to ask the prying questions. So what happened to you? Like what? How did you disappear? How did you get kidnapped? He didn't want to lie to his father, so he went. And this is somebody that Yosef HaTzadik, he lost his mother at a very young age. At about 7 or 8, he lost his mother. And at the age of 17, he lost his father because he was sold as a slave. The last thing that he would want to have is some sort of connection to a family, some sort of a connection to somebody who loved him. He knew that he loved him. That was his father. This says, but if I go and if I visit Yaakov Avinu, then what's going to happen? Yaakov is going to start asking me questions. And if he asks me questions, then he's going to find out that the brothers went and they sold me. He said, I don't want to give up my brothers. And he did not go and he visited his own brothers. And this is why afterwards, even more than that, when these brothers went and says, hey, by the way, this is a message from your dying father, don't harm us, please forgive us. Yosef HaTzadik responded to them. He goes, and if you want to look it up in Bereshit, in chapter 50, verse pasuk 20, he goes and it says, but you went and you intended evil against me. But what did God? God really intended it for the good. He was able to go and live with his life saying, everything was good for the good, even though he saw it afterwards. Still very difficult to internalize. He says, listen, he says, not only that I forgive you, but I will sustain you and your children. I'll take care of you. Don't worry about it. You have nothing to worry about. That's what Yosef HaTzadik told his brothers, who sold them, and he went and he suffered for 12 years. But it goes even one step further. Binyamin, his brother from his own mother, Rachel had 2 children, Yosef and Binyamin. Binyamin was his own brother. Even Binyamin didn't know. One time, before Yosef revealed himself, Binyamin and Yosef were sitting, in a room. And Binyamin thought that he was speaking to like a viceroy, an Egyptian person. He didn't know that he was speaking to Yosef. And Yosef takes out his mystical, Kabbalistic book in the dark world, the dark magic, so not Kabbalistic, mystical book. And he says, listen, this is a book that if you know how to utilize this book, you could find anybody who's alive on planet Earth. And he says, do you know how to utilize this? And Binyamin says, to be honest, yeah, my father taught me how to use this book. So he says, I hear that you have a lost brother. Here's the book, find your lost brother. Binyamin goes and he does the book. He opens it up, turns the pages, figures it out, then he closes it. He waits a second and then he opens it up again and he keeps on repeating the process again and again. Finally, Yosef HaTzadik says, what did you find? Where's your brother? And the Binyamin says, I don't know what to tell you. He says, I did it multiple times and I don't know how, the answer doesn't make any sense. So Yosef goes to Binyamin and says, what does the answer tell you? So Binyamin goes and says, the answer is telling me that my brother is sitting right here with me in this room. He says, but it can't be because it's only me and you, the viceroy of the king. So it can't be something. So I keep on trying to get it, but it keeps on falling to the same answer. This is where Yosef went and revealed himself to Binyamin. He says, it is I am your brother Yosef. He promised him not to tell anything to his brothers yet. Targum Yonasan over here also goes and explains that Binyamin over here also didn't know that his brother sold Yosef. How did Yosef go and explain it? He says that the Ishmaelim the Arabs went and they kidnapped me and they sold me as a slave. Never ever, even to his own brother, he didn't give up. Who gave him up? Who sold him as a slave? Now the question is that you have here a young man even though he was an amazing tzaddik, where did he get this power from? How did he have the ability to go and overcome? What a crazy test. Imagine what that is. Imagine the power that a person has to have not to go and say, in your face to somebody that went and he suffered 12, 13 years because of that. So the answer is, where he got this power from? From his mother Rachel. Let's look at Rachel's story. Rachel goes, and she was supposed to marry Yaakov. And Yaakov realized Lavan, Rachel's father, is a trickster. He's a fraudster. He's a sketch artist. He goes, that doesn't mean drawing. A sketch art, where I learned the sketch from? The Syrian community. That's what they say. They say sketch. That is where I learned it from. So he was somebody that sketches people, that is a fraudster. And Yaakov realized, and Rachel realized that he's probably going to pull something. So Yaakov and Rachel made up signs. Let's make a secret code to make sure that when I get married to you, that I'm marrying you and not anybody else. So, right before the wedding, like literally right before the wedding, Lavan calls over Rachel and says, listen, you're not walking down the aisle. Leah's walking down the aisle. And, Rachel couldn't argue, and it is what it is. And Rachel was going to keep her mouth quiet. Because what's going to happen? Leah is going to walk down the aisle. She's going to sit in front of Yaakov. And Yaakov is going to see, so what are the signs? And Leah is not going to know the signs because only Rachel. So he's going to realize there's something going on over here. And tomorrow they'll restructure the whole wedding and make it all right. But Rachel thought for a second. She's like, wait a minute. She's like, my sister is going to go up in front of everybody. She's going to be so embarrassed if she's going to walk down the aisle and she's not going to get married. And as difficult as it was for a woman who loves Yaakov, she loved her husband. She wanted to marry him. She says, you know what? I don't want to hurt my sister's feeling. She goes over to Leah and she says, hey, listen. And she gave her the codes in like sort of a backhanded fashion. And Leah goes and marries Yaakov. He marries Yaakov, got the code. There's no one knew the better. Now, years go by. Later, Rachel goes and marries Yaakov as well. So you have Rachel, Yaakov, also Bilhah and Zilpah, the maids as well, also went and they get married to Yaakov. But then Leah has children. The maidservants have children. Rachel doesn't have any children. She's barren. She doesn't have any children. So one day, Rachel sees that Reuven, which is Leah's firstborn, is walking with a pair of dudaim. Dudaim is a certain plant that's is very potent is very strong for fertility. So if somebody has an infertility problem, you eat this plant, the special power, whatever the strength it has the ability to help you conceive. So Rachel sees this, and she goes over to her sister Leah, and she says, listen, she says, I see your firstborn, Reuven, has these dudaim, these powerful plants. Please, let me have these dudaim. I don't have any children with my husband. You know what Leah says to her? She's like, wait a minute, hold on. She says, you stole my husband. Like, I married Yaakov, and then afterwards Yaakov had to marry you. So you stole my husband, now you want to take my dudaim? Now you want to take my plants that will be able to go and make me fertile, make me able to have more children? What would a normal person do at this time? Be like, your husband? He was my husband. I gave you him. Be like, are you kidding me? And be like, you gotta be ridiculous. He says, you know what happened? Really? He was supposed to marry me. And I felt bad for you. And because of that, I gave you your signs. So you better do something and give me these dudaim. Just give it to me.
Did she know?
She did not know.
Never?
She never knew. Why did she not know?
She never knew what?
She never knew that Yaakov was intended.
She did know. Why sure she did. That's why she used to cry.
So let's try it out. Very good. Excellent. Yeah. So why did she cry? So let's try to understand. It's beautiful. I'm very happy that you brought this up. So Leah used to, it says the name of Leah were rakot. Why were they like red? Because she would always cry. Why would she cry? Because Yitzhak and Rivka had two children, Yaakov and Esav. The firstborn, Esav, then Yaakov. Lavan also had a firstborn, Leah, and a secondborn, Rachel. Now it was always known, everybody knew, that the firstborn will marry the firstborn, and the secondborn will marry the secondborn. Meaning that, very good. So good thing I came today.
Are the boys like two families?
It's good families. So let's try to understand. It was known that they were married. This is who they're going to marry. So Leah was supposed to marry Esav. Yaakov was supposed to marry Rachel. Then we know that Yaakov comes to Lavan. And when Yaakov comes to Lavan, what does Lavan do? He runs over to him. He hugs him. He's kissing him. He's showing him so much affection. But what really was he doing? He was patting him down. He was like, before you meet a mafia boss, right? You got to pat yourself down. Why was he patting down? Because he knew that his father, Yitzchak, came to his, when he came to marry Rivka, he gave, so much money. He came with camels filled with gold, so much jewelry, so much presents. So he figured now Yaakov is coming. His father is also very wealthy. Where's the money? Where's the moolah? So he goes and he sees that Yaakov is coming without any donkeys, without any camels, without any merchandise. He's like, where? He says, you know what? He's probably hiding it somewhere. So he goes and he gives him a hug. But what was it? His hug was like, how you doing? How's it going? And then he was kissing him, trying to see if there was anything going in his mouth. Maybe he had some gin and James. And then finally, Lavan goes and he says, what's going on with you? Where's the money? How are you doing? So Yaakov Avinu says, listen, really I came with a lot of money. I came with a lot of, to go and marry your daughter. But Eliphaz, Esav's grandson, came and he overtook me and he stole everything from me and I have absolutely nothing. So Lavan goes and he says, but wait a minute, why would Esav's grandson go and want to kill you? What does he have against you? So Yaakov says, because I bought the Bechorah, I bought the firstborn rights of my brother Esav. And Leah heard this and she's like, wait a minute. He says, if Yaakov bought the firstborn rights, that means that who am I supposed to marry? I'm the firstborn. I was supposed to marry Esav. But now that Yaakov went and he bought the firstborn rights from Esav, that means that I'm supposed to marry Yaakov now. So she, in her mind, thought that she was intended for Yaakov because they switched. They bought the rights. So meaning that Rachel was supposed to marry Esav now, not Leah. So Leah, her entire life, thought that she was right. She thought that she was the one who Yaakov was intended to marry, and not Leah, and not Rachel. So when Rachel goes and she gives the signs, she doesn't say anything to Leah. She doesn't say, hey, by the way, he was supposed to marry me. She says, by the way, just FYI, that's why I said through a roundup, through a backhanded fashion, she gave her the signs. And then, when push comes to shove, she didn't have any children. And more than anything in the world, all Rachel wanted was children. That's what she wanted. But even that, she didn't want to go embarrass her sister. She didn't want to give that up. She would not embarrass her sister to give her what she most wanted in her life. And she says, you know what? You're right. Leah goes to Rachel and says, you stole my husband. And now you want to take my dudaim? Instead of Rachel going, it was my husband, she said, listen, Yaakov is supposed to come to my tent tonight. Each wife had their own house. He's supposed to come to my house tonight. You give me the dudaim and you could take Yaakov for tonight. And they made the trade. And from that they were able to make the trade. And then so after that Yosef was born. So we see over here something very interesting. That Rachel overcome what a test. Whew. What a test that she had. She didn't want to embarrass her sister. She didn't want to give that up, but that didn't stop with her. That passed on to her firstborn son, Yosef. Yosef HaTzadik went and he didn't want to go and embarrass his brothers. But where did he get that power? After 12 years in prison, you know where he got that power from? From his mother. He got that power from his mother. That's why the next time that you come across a test, whether it be a test of modesty, of Shabbat, of kosher, of anything else, you have to stop for a second and think. When you're passing a test or when you're failing a test, it doesn't only affect you. It's going to affect your children after you. If you're able to work up to a certain level, that you're able to overcome your temptations, overcome your desires, that will be able to go and pass on the spiritual DNA to your children. You'll be able to overcome that. It's so fascinating that we have the ability to influence our children based on our own actions before our children are born. Before that, because if you go and you work on yourself, and this works like magic. If you're in a test and it's difficult, you don't know what to do, think about your children. Think about what you want your children to have. We live in a very difficult time. We live in a difficult time with modesty, with guarding the eyes, with Torah, with everything. Very, very difficult. Very difficult. Don't you want your children to have an upper hand? I mean, just in the past 10 years, look at how the world has changed. May God help us what's going to be in the next 30 years. You're going to have children, B'ezrat Hashem, in the next, couple of years, and their children are going to grow up not in this. It's not going to, and it doesn't look like, unless Mashiach comes, B'ezrat Hashem, Be'er Be'amenu, it's going to go down before it goes up. The way that it works, in my day, there was no such thing as, people didn't even have cell phones. Like now, children have cell phones, and they have access to the world on the palm of their hands. Who knows what's going to be in a few years? So don't you want to give your children a chance of survival? Spiritual survival. You have the ability to do that. When you go and you overcome your tests, your desires, that strength is going to go and pass on to your children. And during the period of the Cantonese, which is in Russia, very famously known, they would snatch young children, young boys, from their parents' homes when they were very young. And then they would transition into the Tsar's army in a way that they would remove any sort of religion, any belief to anything else. They had to go and they brainwashed them. They actually worked when they were very young. So when they were like under 10 years old, they would go and they would basically grab them away from their parents and brainwash them that there's nothing else matters other than the Tsar's army. So they built soldiers. They built like these super soldiers from when they're very, very young. Now, there was a group of boys that were captured, and a lot of these boys were Jews. Now, this is where it is also very famously known as a Tinok Shenishba, where you have a Jew that's taken at a very young age, and he's brought into the Tsar's army, and he doesn't even know that he's Jewish. And he lives in his entire life that he has absolutely no idea that he's connected to Judaism, and that's why they take them when they're very young. So there was a group of boys that were taken by the Tsar's army at a very young age, that to try to go and convince them to be, atheist and to be like believe in nothing else other than the Russian army. That's the only power that you need to fight for. That's the only thing that you need to live for. But there was one boy amongst this group that was very, very strongly devoted to his religion. Why? Because he remembered that when he was taken away by his parents, his mother and his father were crying, and they were crying one thing: don't forget that you're Jewish. Please don't forget that, because they knew what would happen. And these boys were placed in a certain farm in the country, that the farmer's job was to work them to the bone, but also to go and brainwash them into like, there's only the army, there's nothing else that you need to worry about, all religion is nonsense, and just like implementing them atheistic ideas, just like get them away from everything else other than focus on one thing. And every night, this one boy would go and gather all his friends, and he would speak to them about Emunah, he would speak to them about God, he would speak to them about Torah, and I didn't know much about it, but he said, don't forget who we are, and don't forget where we came from. Now, the army general came over to to check upon the boys and see how they're doing, and the farmer says, listen, I'm trying. Every day we're doing the routines, we're doing what we've planned, we're doing everything on the curriculum, but there's one guy that keeps on ruining everything. He keeps on speaking to them about religion. He keeps on speaking to them about God, and they're holding strong with it. I don't know what to do. So the general goes and calls over this boy. And this was at the end of their seminar at this farm, where meanwhile the next day they were going to be implemented into the Tsar's army. And the general goes over to him and says, listen, he says, I know what you've been doing, and I'm going to give you an ultimatum. Either you renounce your religion and you join the Tsar's army, or we're going to kill you. Penalty is death if you don't renounce your religion tomorrow at the ceremony. So this kid was very shaken about it. He's like, what am I going to do? This is my religion, this is what I believe in. And he goes over and the entire night he's going back and forth, sleeping, and he couldn't sleep, waking up. Now, finally, the next morning he walks into the entire ceremony. And he's so confident. He walks up over there, like smiling, bright, like shining, ready to take on the day. And he walks up, and the Tsar goes over to him. The Tsar was there, like everybody was there, and they say, "Are you ready to renounce your religion and take upon the Russian army?" And he says, "I would love to. I really would love to be a soldier." He says, "But I can't. I am, I'm maimed. I am, I'm injured. I can't serve in the Tsar's army." And the guards were like, "What are you talking about?" And on the desk was a knife. And he grabs the knife, he puts his hand down, and he slams the knife on his fingers. And the fingers and his hand separate. Kriyat Yam Suf. And the kid sees the blood, passes out. And he's going in and out of consciousness. Meanwhile, they bandage him up, they rush him to the hospital. He's in and out of consciousness for like 3 days. 3 days later, he finally comes to, and he is so surprised and shocked to see who is sitting by his bedside. It's the Tsar himself. And he's like, he sees him, he like gets up, over there, he has like his entire, hand is bandaged. And the Tsar says, listen, I have to ask you. He says, where did you get that strength? He says, it's so bad for you to serve me, to serve the Tsar's army, that you were willing to cut off your fingers in order to serve me. He's like, where does a young boy like that get his strength? So the boy goes and he says, listen, he says, I'll be honest with you. He says, and he tells him the whole story. He says, your general told me that either I have to renounce my religion, or I have to go and I have to, death penalty, die. So I was very troubled by it. I didn't know what to do. And I was tossing and turning all night. I didn't know what am I going to do. And eventually I said, you know what? I'm going to give in. I'm not going to give myself my life up for it. I'll give in and then I'll figure it out. And I fell asleep. After I made my decision, I fell asleep. And then when I fell asleep, I had a dream. And in the dream, I was in this rapid stream where I was falling down, and it was very, very dangerous, and I felt like I was going to die. And then I saw a chain that was floating in the water. So I went and I grabbed that chain. And as I grabbed that chain, I saw that the chain was attached to the tree trunk, around by the bay. And I wanted to go, and I wanted to save myself. And I started to go, and I started to like pull myself up. And I saw that each of these chains were inscribed a name. And I saw my grandfather's name over there, and I saw the next chain was my father, and the last chain was me. And as I was looking at that last chain, I saw that that chain was very brittle, it was about to break. And I realized that this chain is my connection to my Judaism, to my ancestral heritage, to who I am and who I belong. And I realized that I'm about to give everything up. And if I give everything up, then I'm going to go and I'm going to drown, and that's going to be the end of me. And I figured, in my dream, I went and I decided, I'm not giving it up. I am willing to risk my life. I am not breaking this chain. From my grandfathers, I'm going back. And I decided that I'm going to do whatever it is that I can to go and stay as a Jew. And that's why I went and I cut my fingers off to show that I'm no longer eligible to be in the army, and now I have to be a Jew. And I can be whoever I want. The Tsar was so moved by this that he went and he said, you know what? When you get healed, you're free to go. You don't have to serve in the army. And he went and he was free to go. Now we have to start and ask him, be like, that's very nice when our parents are religious and when our grandparents are religious. What about if the parents are not religious and you're becoming more religious? Where's your chains? Like, where is it going? Like, how far does it go back? So even furthermore, we could also ask this question: what about you have big righteous people that have children that are not religious? I know a few of them. In Baruch Hashem now they're coming, but you have the story. That story happened. You see these. We have big righteous tzaddikim that their children don't pass it on. The schut avot that goes passed on to their children. So the Emunah Shlema brings down a story. There was a Baal Tshuva by the name of Ophel that his father hated religion. Hated Israeli family. Father hated religion, and one day after he finished the army, after he finished that, he was traveling the world. And he went and he decided one day, something clicked in him, that he decided that he wanted to learn about Judaism. So he went to a rabbi and he says, I want to learn about Judaism. So the rabbi started learning with him. And the rabbi saw that this guy was a genius, like a mathematical, photographic memory type of genius. And he started learning with him. Within 2 months, this person who didn't keep Shabbat 2 months ago finished entire Masechta and Gemara. Finished Gemara and Megillah. And he wanted to go and make a siyum. He wanted to go and make a celebration that he finished a tractate of Gemara. And he calls up the rabbi and he says, Rabbi, listen, I'm so happy that I was able to finish the Gemara from you. I want to make a siyum. I'm making it in my house and I want to invite you. The rabbi was like, listen, I would love to come. He says, but I know your father. Your father hates religion. I helped you come closer to religion. Your father's going to murder me. He's going to kill me. What's going to happen is, and the son goes and says, listen, don't worry about it. I'll take care of that. You come, don't worry about my father. So, bless you. So he goes, Gesundheit, love it. And he goes and he says, fine, I'll come. He goes over and he walks into the siyum. And he's sitting by the siyum and he sees that the boy, Ophel, is sitting over there in the front by the head table. And next to him, there is an Israeli guy that looks like he belongs in the mafia. Shaven head, big guy, has a white paper kippah, stapled on it, one of those kotel kippot, stapled on his head, not stapled on his head, but it's on his head. And then next to him is a rabbi with a long white beard. And the rabbi's like, who is that guy? Who is that rabbi? And meanwhile, he's thinking about it, and Ophel stands up. And he's making the siyum. And he goes and he gives a very, very long speech about the Gemara, going back and forth. And the genius that he was able to go back and forth and bring this beautiful Dvar Torah. After he finished speaking, he made the siyum. Everyone said Mazal Tov. Then this rabbi with a long white beard stands up to give a speech. And he says that growing up, he grew up in Sanhedria, which is in Israel, a place in Israel. And he said that he had a brother 6 years older than him who was a genius. And this brother went, and when he finished, elementary school, every high school were begging for him to come. He was so smart. His future was he was destined for greatness. And he got into a good yeshiva, but after a few years, by 12th grade, he started drifting off. He met a few bad friends. He started drifting off from the path. And my parents went, and it's my brother, 6 years older than me. He went and they begged him, please come back to the path. But instead of coming back, he went further and further away until finally he left the house. And my parents always thought that he's going to come back because he's going to need money, he's going to need somewhere to stay, but he never came back. And my mother, this rabbi goes up and he says, I remember every Friday night when she would light the candles for 40 minutes. 40 minutes she would sit and cry for her son Yaakov to go and come back to religion. And she did this for none less than 18 years. 18 years every Friday night for 40 minutes she would cry for her son to come back to religion. But he never came back. He never came back for money. He never came back to sleep. He just never came back. 18 years later, she passes away. Then he goes and he says, my father went and he continued this tradition. He went and he did this for 7 additional years. Every Friday night, he would light the candles. And every Friday night, he would cry for 40 minutes, begging God that he should bring back his son Yaakov to go and come back to Judaism. And then he goes and he says, my father passed away. And he says, Yaakov never came, not to the funerals, not to the Shiva. He didn't, not for the Shloshim, nothing. And he says, today has been 30 years since since Yaakov left the house. And today I got a phone call from my long-lost brother, Yaakov. And he says, listen, he says, I have a son, Ofer, he's making a siyum, I want you to come. So he says, I came to the siyum. And this is the siyum of my nephew. This is my brother Yaakov, and this is my nephew Ofer. And he says, I went and I timed his speech. I timed it, and it was exactly 40 minutes. And I remember always wondering, I'm like, I don't understand God. My mother, for 18 years, she cried for 40 minutes every single week, 52 weeks a year. She went and she cried to bring her son, and she never saw that. My father did that for another 7 years after that, and he never saw that. What happened to all their cries? What happened to all their tears? What happened to all their prayers? Is it gone? And today I see the fruition of their answers. They didn't see it, but I see it today. I timed it, and it was exactly 40 minutes, the speech that Ophir gave, on the siyum for his Gemara in Megillah. And he goes, and the story continues that Ophir ended up becoming fully religious. He ended up learning in yeshiva full time. He ended up marrying a religious family, and he ended up bringing back his father also to religion. We have many times that we see that what's going on. The parents are so righteous. What happened to the children? What happened to them? It doesn't make sense. I thought there's a skut avot, there's an ancestral merit. Where is it going? Sometimes it skips a generation because of free will. God gives the free will of the child to have it, but it's always there. The power is always there. You may not see it in your lifetime, but it's always there. There's always something going on over there. There's always something going deep inside. The saddest thing is, for me, when I deal with people that are secular and they want to become religious, and you know why they can't become religious? Because their parents don't let them. Be like, what? You're going to keep Shabbat, but how are we going to go visit our friends? They're going to say, oh, your daughter is religious, your son's religious, oh, you're too good for us. Like that, and they convince their children, this is backwards, the ancestral merit is going backwards. They convince their children to go away from the Torah. Instead of towards the Torah, they go and they convince their children to go away from it. But the truth is, even if parents like that, there's an innate power. There's something inside of you, and inside of every single one of us that has that power to come back to Judaism, that has to come back to to religion. And it's not only with parents. There are many people in the Kiruv world that they go and they say, listen, I tried so hard. Or even a friend. And they say, I tried to talk to them to get them closer to religion. But it didn't work. They went back with their non-Jewish boyfriend, they went back with their non-Jewish girlfriend, they're living their life. I guarantee you, every single word of Torah, every single word of Emunah, every single chizuk that you give somebody else, it affects them inside. It might not come out now, but it will eventually come out. There's a story that Rabbi David Asher brings down that there was a person that moved to America in the early 1900s. And as we know, in America in the early 1900s, people fell from religion very quickly. And he had 8 children. And one child after another child ended up leaving religion, ended up assimilating. Finally, he had one last child. This is like the little boy, the last final boy named Mordechai. And he says, listen, you're my last hope. And the father started crying. And he says, please, I'm begging you, stay with religion. Stay with Judaism. You're my only hope that has all your siblings that left it. But please, you stay with it. And he says, listen, Dad. He says, I get what you're saying. He was 16 at the time. He says, I'll try my best, but please don't cry. I'll try. As the years goes by, and his father passes away, and Mordechai eventually ends up leaving the religion as well. And years go by, he gets married, and he has children. One day, his child calls him up, and he says, listen, I want to go to Israel, I want to visit Israel. His father says, fine, enjoy. Completely lived their lives completely secular. Finally, his son, which was named Shlomo, which is named after his father, which was his grandfather, he calls him up one day, and he tells his father, he says, listen, Dad, he says, I went to Or Sameach, I got a little taste of religion. I want to sit here and I want to learn. The father was like, what? Absolutely not. He hangs up the phone. calls his travel agent, older story, calls his travel agent before orbits, right? He calls his travel agent and he says, book me a next trip out to Israel. He goes and he books the next flight out to Israel. He's going to convince his son not to be religious, not to go and learn in yeshiva, not to follow anything with Judaism. And he gets on the plane and he's sitting on the plane. And as he's sitting on the plane, all of a sudden there's a single memory that comes back to him. The tears of his father that cried to him and says, please stay with the religion. Don't fall away. Don't. You're my last hope. And this image is like constantly haunting him as he's flying. And when he lands, he goes over to his son. And instead of convincing him to go away, he says, listen, you do what you need to do. You have my full support. What happened? The father went and he said, listen, you're my last hope. And he thought that that's it. This is all I have. And it ended up not working out. But deep down, there's something that sticks in our soul, in each and every single one of us, that'll come out at one point in time. Rabbi Yoel Gold also has a story that there was a girl that used to babysit in Santa Fe, New Mexico, went and she, at the age of 12, she used to go and babysit a secular family. And she used to put the children to bed. And when she used to put the children to bed, they were completely secular, but she was religious. So she would go and she would tell them, you know, before you go to sleep, you have to say Shema Yisrael. And she would teach them to say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And this is what they would say before they would go to sleep. Eventually, these boys grew up. One of the boys ended up serving in the American Army in the Iraqi war. He was in somewhere in Iran, Iraq, whatever it was, during the war. And he was in a situation that was very, very dire. It seemed like he wasn't going to make it. And he didn't know what to do. And finally, somehow, when he was younger, he remembered a sentence, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And he went and he started screaming, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and he was saved from his situation. And after he was discharged from the army, he's like, wait a minute. It's like, he really felt that the reason that he was saved from his situation was because he said Shema Yisrael. He says, I got to find something out. And he ended up going, and he ended up traveling to Israel, and he ended up going to yeshiva, and he was learning in yeshiva in Israel. And while he was learning yeshiva in Israel, he had a friend of his, and he says, you want to hear something funny? You want to know how I got here? And he says the whole story. He says, I had a babysitter when I was younger at Santa Fe, New Mexico, and she used to say Shema Yisrael, and I was in the war, and I said Shema Yisrael, and I started instigating me, and one thing led to another. Now I'm here in yeshiva. So the person that he said to, he says, wait a minute, I'm also from New Mexico. He says, what is the babysitter's name? And he says the babysitter's name, and he's like, that's my sister. He says, my sister was the one that was babysitting you, and that all circled back, because many times in life, we try to help other people, and we see that it didn't help. There's no such thing as Torah that doesn't help. It helps. It might not help now. It might not help in 10 years, but eventually it's going to come out and it's going to help. I want to finish off with one final story. There's a Zohar in Parashat Naso that says that every single day there is a spiritual voice that comes out of heaven that is basically Hashem saying to his children, come close to me. Let's get close. Says the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Eichah goes and quotes the Baal Shem Tov and says, this we don't hear, but our soul hears it. Every single day, God calls out to each and every single one of us, saying, please come close to us. Please go and come closer to Torah, come closer to God. And the story goes that there was a little girl that asked her mother, says, can you tell me a story about the war when I was younger? And this girl and the parents lived through the Holocaust. And the mother said, I'll tell you the story of how you were saved. There was, the word was out that Hitler, was going and he was traveling through Europe. And he was taking everybody, and everybody heard what's happening to the Jewish people. And during that time, you were born. And as I was sitting in the hospital and you were born, the nurse that was taking care of me was going and saying, what a shame. He says, look at this beautiful girl. He says, what a waste of money, what a waste of resources. It's only a matter of time before Hitler is going to take care of you. And this is what the nurse that helped me give birth to you told me. And I started crying and I started holding you. And I'm like, this is my child. Like, how do you speak to my child like that? And as we got discharged from the hospital, there was a woman who came up to me and says, look at this beautiful little girl. She says, you were so beautiful. Everything was perfect about you. And this Polish woman, non-Jewish woman, goes and says, listen, says, she's going to die. Hitler's going to kill her. I don't have any children. Let me raise her as my own. Give her to me. And the mother goes to her door and says, what? He's like, this is my child. And she held her so tight. She says, this is my child and she will be raised as a Jew and nothing else. And a few months go by and me and your father realize that Hitler is going through the town and he's coming at us next. And there's no way that you're going to be able to survive. So we decided that we're going to send you with a peasant family living in the countryside. We're going to give the last money that we had to be able to make you survive. And she goes over and she says, you know where your name comes from? I was sitting in the hospital, and this nurse comes over to me and tells me, look at these Jews. Hitler's going to take care of you. And I was like, what's going to be with my daughter? And as this was happening, your father came and he was going to go read the Megillah to me that day, because that day was Purim. And I decided, you know what I'm going to name you? I'm going to name you Esther Malka. Esther the queen, as a sign of hope, as a sign of something's going to be better for the future. Just like Haman tried to go and destroy us and he didn't, so to you're going to give us that hope, that potential, that we're going to also go and survive through this. And we called you Estherka. It's Esther Malka. For short, combined it, Estherka. And I think that's some sort of Russian thing, they do like chka or something at the end of everything. So she goes and she says, you are amazing, you are beautiful, you are so perfect. But then came the time that we had to give you up. And we gave you up to this peasant family. We paid them our last dollars and they took you in. And years went by and somehow miraculously, me and your father came back from the war. We survived. And our main focus after the war was finding you. We went and we traveled to your village, and then we traveled another 10 miles to go and find you. And we came to your farm, and we saw you playing out in the tree right next to the house. And we were so happy. We were like, that's our child, that's our daughter, that's our little Esther Malka. And we ran over to her and be like, Esther Malka, it's us, it's your parents. And you sat there, just like looking at us with complete, no recognition whatsoever. And all of a sudden our hearts sank. And all of a sudden you ran to the house, to the farmhouse. And out comes a woman, a short woman, holding your hand, and you were sucking your thumb. And you walk up over to us, and we're looking at her, and all of a sudden, my eyes started filling with tears, like, but this is my child. This is this is mine. This is Esther Malka. And she's like, Esther Malka, it's mommy and tati. It's your parents are here to come take you back. And you didn't recognize us. You didn't see us. You didn't understand that we are actually parents. And all of a sudden we scream out, Estherka, it's your parents, come to us. And all of a sudden it was as if you woke up from a dream and you let go of your fake mother's hand and you started running over to us and you hugged us and we reunited together. Says the Baal Shem Tov, says every single day we have God screaming over to us, to our souls, come home. Come home to us. Come home to where the Torah is. Come home to where you are from. And we don't hear it, but our souls hear it. And just like this little girl woke up because she heard her name, may we also wake up and hear our name, hear God call us and tell us, come home. Please come home to, back to the Torah, back to the way of God. We look at the story of Chanukah and we think about it. The Maccabees, how did they have the power? A bunch of rabbis went over to the strongest army known to man at that time. The Greek army was the strongest power at that time. How did they go and they take them on? So maybe you could say a Kiddush. We know that the Maccabim, the Chashmonaim, they were descendants of Kohanim. We know Pinchas HaKohen was zealous for God. He did everything for God. He was fighting for God. Everything that you do has an effect on your descendants. And eventually that affected the descendants of the Chashmonaim, Aaron HaKohen and his descendants. They had the power to go and overcome the greatest army. You know where that came from? Let's say the Chidush, you know where they came from? The Zchut Avot. The merit of their ancestors, they were able to go and overcome it. So the next time, you know the lesson that we learn for Chanukah? The next time that you have a test, think about not only what the test is going to do for you, but think about what the test is going to do for your children. What the test is going to do for your spiritual DNA that you're going to pass on. We know that it's going to be difficult for them. We know that it's going to be very hard to stay true to the Torah. So don't you want to give them the strongest power that they have to overcome it? Now let's take this one step further. It's not only you, but also who you marry. Let's say you're not sure who you're going to marry, but let's say the guy or the girl is maybe not as high as a spiritual level as you want him to be. And you're thinking, what should I do? Stop for a second and forget about you for a second, but what about your children? Don't you want your children to have that spiritual DNA, the power to overcome them, the power to go and overcome the temptations and the desires that they're going to go to be able to succeed in this world and in the next world? If we stop for a second and think about the lesson of Chanukah, the power that the Jewish nation had when everybody was destroyed, even the Jews were going to go destroying from within. You know where we started off with a story that there were two women that went and gave a brit milah to their children. You know who gave them up? The Hellenized Jews. The Jews gave them up. The Jews caused their own downfall. We cause our own downfall. Always. It's always like that. So the question is are we going to produce the next generation that are going to bring Mashiach? Even our generation is going to bring Mashiach. Or are we going to go and say, listen, it is what it is. This is what the life is, and this is what we have to deal with. You have to stop and think. Think not only for you, but think for your children. Think for your ancestors. And even if you have children, you still have the ability to go and pass off that spiritual DNA. Overcome the desires and the temptations that you have, and that will pass over to your children. And I guarantee you one of the strongest powers to overcome any temptation that you have. The next time you're not sure if you should dress modestly or not. The next time you're not sure if you break Shabbat, think about your children. What mother or father doesn't want to do for their children? What mother and father doesn't want to give the best that they can for their children? With that, we'll be able to overcome everything. And when we overcome everything, we'll really overcome the power of Chanukah. The power of Chanukah is overcoming the secularism and going into the true Torah way of life. And with that, B'ezrat Hashem will bring Mashiach b'meher b'yameinu. Any questions? Yes?
How did Rachel have the power? Like, where did she get it from?
Very good question. The question is, how did Rachel Imenu have the power? Where did she get that power from? And you know what? I thought about that. And I was thinking, where did that come from? And sometimes you just, maybe there is a source for it, but I couldn't find anything. But sometimes you have to start your own genealogy. There's a story, I think it's by Baruch Levine. And in the story, it's a song. Yeah, exactly. Where basically the mother, and this is what I thought about. The mother had a whole, like ancestral genealogy of all the, the righteous tzaddikim that were her father, her grandfather, and so on and so forth. And one day there was a big fire, and it destroyed everything. But the reason why the mother was so bothered by was the mother bothered by that fact that this paper, this genealogy was destroyed. So her little boy at that time went over to the mother and says, "Don't worry, mommy." He says, "I'll start a new one, and it will start from me." And he ended up being a huge gadol. Do you remember who it was? I forgot who the gadol ador was, but he's a huge rabbi, huge gadol ador, and he started his own generation. Sometimes we may not have that ancestral power that we have, but that doesn't mean that you can't start it. So start it from yourself. You could start it right here, right now. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes, every day.
So sometimes I get this feeling like, oh, I want to do something like that, right? And I'm like, it's 11:30 at night.
So that power that you have inside, it can either...
What do you do? I come up with John, I'm not covering me, you know what I'm saying?
Right, well, when you go to sleep, you don't, whatever, the different topic in itself. The tznius is but I'm saying like it's not...
I could be like, okay, fine, I'll do something now, but I have this feeling like,
Oh, I hear what you're saying. What to do at that time. So when you have an urge and power, you feel this like surge of energy that you could do something closer to bring yourself closer to God, then even if it's not right there right now, it's 11:30 at night and you're about to go to fall asleep, but think about it like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. There's also a power of making yourself a plan of like what's going to happen. So sometimes what's beneficial, and once you make yourself the plan, then you have the ability to go and overcome it and actually bring it to fruition. So when you have that power, utilize and be like, okay, think about it. Be like, okay, now I have the power. What am I going to do? And be like, you know what? I'm going to tell myself I'm going to do it. And when you tell yourself you're going to do something, utilize that power that you have to bring that to fruition. Utilize that power to go and say, you know what? I said I'm going to do it. Let me do it. So tomorrow I'm going to go and I'm going to pray. I'm going to say Tehillim. I'm going to go and just modestly. I'm going to go and listen to the Torah class. Whatever it is that you decide to do, utilize that power to do it. So even if it's not then and there right now, utilize it for the next day. But you have to tap into that power. You have to capitalize. Such an important thing in this world and the next world. We always have to capitalize on everything that we have. Everything that we have, you have to capitalize on your opportunities. If you're going and you're dating, then capitalize on the opportunity. Don't be lazy. Go, do what you need to do. If you're capitalizing in business, go and do what you need to do. In spirituality, everything we need to do is you need to capitalize on it. Very, very important. In order to be successful in life, you always have to fight, you always have to win, you always have to work. But you got to capitalize. With capitalization, you'll be able to go and be able to succeed both in this world and in the next world. Any questions? Any other questions? No? Hazakabahu.